She invited them. She cooked for them. She served individual portions, plated carefully, one beef Wellington per person. She sat across the table as they ate. Then she watched. On the afternoon of July 29th, 2023, 4 people sat down to lunch in a quiet suburban home in Leongatha, Victoria, Australia. By the following morning, all 4 were in hospital. Within 6 days, 3 of them were dead. The woman who had cooked the meal told investigators it was an accident, a terrible accident. She had no idea how it could have happened. This is the story of Erin Patterson, and the question that even the judge who sentenced her could not answer. Why? Don and Gail Patterson were the parents of Erin's estranged husband, Simon. Heather Wilkinson was Simon's aunt. Her husband, Ian, a local pastor, came too. Simon himself had been invited. He pulled out the night before, telling Erin he didn't feel comfortable coming. He was the only one who didn't eat. He was the only one who didn't get sick. The guests who did arrive sat down to a beef Wellington, a careful, considered meal, the kind that takes time and attention. Erin told them she had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. That was why she had called them together. She wanted them close. She wanted their support. She watched them eat. Within 24 hours, all 4 were admitted to hospital with what appeared to be severe gastrointestinal symptoms. Within days, their livers were failing. Gail Patterson died first, then Heather Wilkinson, then Don Patterson, despite receiving a liver transplant. Ian Wilkinson survived after spending weeks in intensive care. Cause of death: Amanita phalloides, death cap mushrooms, the most toxic mushroom known to exist. 3 months before the lunch in April 2023, CCTV footage from parks and nature reserves in the Gippsland region captured a woman foraging in areas known for death cap mushrooms. On April 28th, the same day her phone placed her in the vicinity of those foraging sites, Erin Patterson bought a Sunbeam food dehydrator. She did not mention the dehydrator to investigators. She did not mention the foraging. On August 2nd, as her guest lay in hospital, she drove to a waste recycling center and disposed of the dehydrator. When investigators found it, it still had her fingerprints on it and residue of death cap mushrooms inside. In forensic psychology, the period between a decision and an act is called the preparation phase. It is not the most dramatic part of a case. It rarely produces the moments that end up in headlines, but it is, arguably, the most psychologically revealing, because preparation requires the mind to hold 2 realities simultaneously, the one it shows the world and the one it is quietly, methodically building toward. That gap between the face presented and the intention concealed has a name: impression management. And in the Erin Patterson case, it didn't begin on the day of the lunch. It began months earlier, in the quiet of an autumn forest. During the trial, Crown Prosecutor Nanette Rogers described what she called Patterson's 4 calculated deceptions. Not one act, 4, each targeting a different audience, each designed to control what that audience believed. The first deception: the invitation itself. Patterson told her guests she had ovarian cancer, a diagnosis that was, prosecutors established, entirely fabricated. The cancer did not exist, but it served its purpose. It was the reason for the lunch, the emotional hook that would bring them to the table. The second deception: the meal. The lethal doses of poison concealed inside what the prosecutor called, in the most chilling phrase of the entire trial, a nourishing meal used as a vehicle to deliver the deadly poison. The third deception: herself. In the days following the lunch, Patterson reported feeling unwell. She presented herself as another victim, another person the mushrooms had harmed. This is the detail that forensic psychologists pay attention to because it requires something beyond ordinary lying. It requires the construction of an entirely separate identity, the survivor who cannot understand what went wrong, rather than the perpetrator managing the consequences of what went right. The fourth deception, the cover-up. The dehydrator disposed of at a recycling center. Her phone and devices factory reset, deleting evidence. The initial lie to investigators that she had not foraged, had not owned a dehydrator, had no idea how death caps could have entered the meal. Each deception was aimed at a different target: the guests, the family, the investigators, the public. But all four served the same function: to manage what each audience believed was true. Impression management, at its most deliberate, is not a single performance. It is a system. Multiple versions of the same person, maintained simultaneously, each one calibrated for a different room. There is something unusual about this case that sets it apart from almost every other murder tried in an Australian court. No motive was ever established, not proven, not even clearly argued. The prosecution presented financial tensions. Simon had filed tax returns listing himself as single, which reduced Erin's government child support payments. Facebook messages from December 2022 showed Patterson expressing rage at the family. "I'm sick of this. I want nothing to do with them." But no clear, singular motive connected those grievances to a poisoned beef Wellington. At sentencing, Justice Christopher Beale looked directly at the woman before him and said, "Only you know why you committed them." That sentence is extraordinary. A judge delivering a life sentence to a convicted murderer and acknowledging that the interior of this particular mind remains, even after a 10-week trial, opaque. What we can say, forensically, is that the absence of a visible motive is not evidence of its absence. It is evidence of how completely it was managed. The same system that maintained 4 separate deceptions for an external audience may have maintained a 5th, internal one. The story told to the self about why this was necessary. That story has never been spoken aloud, and it is unlikely that it ever will be. On July 7th, 2025, after 6 days of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict: guilty on all counts. On September 8th, 2025, Erin Patterson was sentenced to 3 life sentences with a non-parole period of 33 years, among the longest sentences ever handed to a woman in Australia. Justice Beale described the crimes as requiring substantial premeditation. He found that Patterson had shown no pity toward her victims and had engaged in an elaborate cover-up. Her lack of remorse, he said, pours salt into all the victims' wounds. Ian Wilkinson, the only guest to survive the lunch, addressed the court. He described the loss of his wife Heather, who died 6 days after the meal. They had been married for 44 years. As of July 2026, Erin Patterson's appeal against both her conviction and her sentence has been listed for hearing by the Victorian Court of Appeal on August 19th and 20th. The Director of Public Prosecutions has also filed a separate appeal, arguing the sentence is manifestly inadequate. Patterson has maintained her innocence throughout. She sat through the verdict without visible reaction. She sat through the sentencing the same way, controlled, composed, still managing, even then, the only thing she had left to manage: how she appeared. And here is the question this case leaves open. When the system that sustained 4 simultaneous deceptions finally stopped working, when the jury saw through every layer, was there anything left underneath? Or had the performance become the person?